Okay. The Marvel announcement. First of all, my initial reaction was just being taken aback. I was very surprised. I was, you know, my expectations have been completely subverted. But maybe not for the reason that a lot of people think. But before I go into that, the whole announcement of Robert Downey Jr. being Doctor Doom, um, a year or even 2 years back, I decided to have the opinion, actually, probably around when Bob Iger took over from Bob Chapek as CEO of Disney, and in so doing, put the power back where it ought to be, gave Kevin Feige more control. They started to control their content a lot more, reduce it a lot more, focus on the quality and things like that, change the game plan. Of course, there were the issues with Jonathan Majors as well and Kang, and so they had to reconfigure that. And they went back to the drawing board. And I have faith when they're in desperation. They were running out of money before the MCU got created, right? Desperation brings them to be extremely creative, to plan really well, and they still have Kevin Feige. So because of that, I stopped doing things like fan casting. I even stopped theorizing. Lots of different people ask me, what do you think is going to happen with this character? Who do you think would be best to play with this character? Do you think it's going to be that and the other? I decided to say, no, I don't care. Not that I don't care, but I do understand that whoever they cast is who they think will be best placed to play the role they have written. None of us know what they have written. You can see this many times before with so many characters that have been cast, and in so many naysayers, usually because we have a certain expectation of the script based on our knowledge of comics, books, source material, whatever it happens to be. Sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong. But the fact is we don't know. So I like to give a chance, especially if there's a proven track record. So as I had stopped having expectations on which actors were playing which characters, it allowed me to enjoy what came. I was like, I know they're working on something, let me see it, and then I'll be able to make a judgment. Deadpool is a great example of where that's really worked out, where I was overjoyed at the entertainment. So this way of looking at things got challenged when Robert Downey Jr. was announced as Doctor Doom, because Tony Stark, and consequently Robert Downey Jr., I'm emotionally connected to. And so I found myself kind of being like, what the hell? How the heck is this going to work? I was wrestling with my feelings, and then, as with anything else, I had to stop and think, okay, why am I feeling this? What's making me react this way? And what's the logic behind it? So I started doing therapy on myself, which is what I do a lot of. Now, once I started to think about why I was disappointed, I realized it's because in any way, shape or form, I would really love Tony Stark back, or at least, I don't know, the ghost of Tony Stark. When I say the ghost of Tony Stark, I mean Armor Wars, Stark Industries. I don't mean using Stark Industries in something like Spider-Man to take away his identity. I mean in other features. I mean in Ironheart. I mean an AI of Tony Stark for some reason. Or heck, showing a different version of him in another universe. Like, whatever it happens to be. I miss Tony Stark. It's the character that I really connect with. And for lack of a better description, this felt a bit like cock blocking. It's kind of like just dangling a carrot in front of me and I can never reach it by having Robert Downey Jr. as Doctor Doom. I think that's what it felt like. And I felt kind of like, oh, how dare you do this? It's like he's there, but he's not the character that I want, because the person I miss is the character of Tony Stark. Once I got myself over that and started to think about the larger implications and start to think of Doom specifically, not just of Stark, I felt there are reasons to be optimistic. And I think a lot of people struggle to think like, how is this going to work? Robert Downey Jr. is always have this face shown. Is he going to be scarred? Is he going to have a mask? It's not going to work if it's not in that very yada, 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 etc., etc., etc. And so I had to remind myself of a few things. One, I have been praying, besides trying to manifest Robert Downey Jr. back into the MCU, I've been praying for the Russos to be back. The Russos, arguably, for me, have created the best MCU movies that exist. And more specifically, them with Kevin Feige. Because I'm not saying that every movie they create is amazing, but the ones they create with Kevin Feige in the MCU are fantastic. They have brought elements from the comics and combined it with the lore in the MCU in ways that I'm just pleased and satisfied with. It's not that they do it exactly like the comics, but they've proven that they can do this. Infinity War is not like the comics. Civil War is not like the comics. But they've taken the spirit of them, they've taken the spirit of some of the characters, and they've applied it to the stories that exist in the MCU in a really delicate way, not getting everything right, but getting so much right that you're effervescing with enthusiasm for the movies. So I have faith in the Russos and Feige, and that's number one. And I think if they're casting Robert Downey Jr., they have a reason for it. They know what their general idea is. They know what whatever remnants of the script have been created. They know what that is, and they know what would fit that script. We don't. Like, we're naturally going to try and fit it into our world, which might not make sense. And if it doesn't make sense, then we will follow those thoughts up with, this must be a cash grab thing. Because of what happened to Jonathan Majors, they need another like star to try and offset that and things like that. Some of those may be correct. Marketing wise, they do need to offset that. But it's not mutually exclusive from them creating a good feature. The second point is Robert Downey Jr. himself. He is a phenomenal actor. Even just for getting things like, Oppenheimer and whatnot, all the awards he's won, how great he was at Tony Stark. He doesn't just do roles which are his personality, like say Tony Stark. I put a story up, a meme of him in Tropic Thunder, describing himself as a dude, playing a dude, acting another dude. I can't remember what the full phrase is. But the reason I put that up was actually not to mock. It was actually to support the fact that he can act any role. That was a really sensitive role, and he did it so well. I laugh my head off every time I think of that. And if he can disappear into a role like that, disappear into two roles like that, it was an inception of roles he was doing in that movie. Besides, things like Chaplin and whatnot, then he can act Doom in whatever way is needed. If the script is some variant of Stark, just like Stark, Doom, just like Stark, sees themselves as the hero and there are consequences for what they do, he can do that. If it's just to get the complexity, he can do that. If it is to be a comic accurate Doom with accent and everything, he can do that. If it's to be completely scarred and not see his face like the Mandalorian and whatnot, he can do that. I do have faith in his acting ability. So that's just speaking plainly about the Russos and my faith in them and Feige, and my faith in the acting. Right? Okay, so we got that far. There are a lot of angles they can take with this. I mentioned Civil War before. I'm making comparisons because Civil War is my favorite individual MCU movie, right? It is a Captain America movie. They did incorporate lots of other characters, and they made it work. And I believe it's still a Cap movie. I felt that they still had that at its heart. And the Civil War crossover in the comics is probably my favorite crossover that exists there. I've actually been rereading some of those comic books recently. It's so vast. Before the Civil War movie came out, we knew, at least those of us who had read the comics, knew there was so much that needed to be set up to do a good Civil War movie. And there were a lot of doubts, if you remember at that time as well. For example, the whole Superhero Registration Act was to do with people being unmasked, not just working for the government, but also being unmasked. We had an MCU world where people do not wear masks. Their identities are public already, with the exception of Spider-Man, who had not been introduced until Civil War. So those are things that wouldn't work. They talked about, I think in trailers, they talked about Black Panther being the one who's going to switch sides and not Spider-Man. There was a big thing with revealing Spider-Man's identity to the media, the reactions to it, the things that led him to want to change sides back to Captain America, and everything that ensued from there. Tony Stark being perceived as a villain in some people's eyes, leading him to become director of S.H.I.E.L.D., his relationship with Cap. and so many other characters, X-Men, Defenders, having sets of heroes that people don't know about. There was so much to the story, and it's like, we're nowhere near that. How are we going to build up to this in Civil War? And they pulled it off by using the canon that exists, taking the elements from the comic book that make the progression of the character development exactly what they ought to be, but in the MCU. They did that so intricately and made an amazing movie and completely cast aside those doubts. They called it the Sokovia Accords. They made it specific to incidents that have happened in the MCU. That is different to what happened in the comics, but they made it work. And that's what they're good at. Same thing with Infinity War, etc., etc. So I do think that they can make a Doom that works here. Now, there's several avenues they can take. They can use elements of Stark, Sorcerer Supreme. They could use elements of infamous Iron Man, which is essentially a combination of Doom and Iron Man armor. They can use Doctor Doom's actual origin and make him a variant in another universe, the Fantastic Four's universe, for example, as just a character. And in that, they can perhaps give us something that we never would have had in the MCU, which is Reed Richards and Stark working together. That's something that I've wanted to see, especially in an Illuminati or something like that. They can give us that in a certain way before showing, whether they call him Stark or Doom, whatever, going towards being Doctor Doom or coming in contact with the mystic arts or whatever it happens to be or whatever turns him. He can act that. He can make that work. There are so many avenues they can go down, and there are reasons to be optimistic. And it's just going to be a matter of time before we know what it is. I'm not saying that, wow, this we've got this in the bag, it's going to be great. I'm saying there are avenues they can go down. There are reasons to be optimistic. And that helps me. The other thing is, Kevin Feige, in his position, he's a master planner. Russos are great executors. They have anticipated all our questions. I guarantee that they've anticipated the doubts of Robert Downey Jr. being this character. They want to get impact, yes, but they also know that there'll be some people saying this can be a cash grab, or how's this going to work and whatnot. They're not just in this bubble. They're looking at all the different avenues. So they are thinking, how do we satisfy the fans? Especially since the view of the MCU has been at an all-time low. Right now, phase one of their plan is bringing excitement back, getting people excited about the next movie again by spacing things out, using Deadpool to re-energize the MCU fans. And then when that happens, it buys time. So now you notice that there's been all this time before Deadpool. Now there's excitement. They brought out a trailer for Agatha all along. They brought a trailer for the next Captain America movie. And again, that excitement buys them time and it gets people to wait in anticipation, and they can make sure things are done right. They know they're on a precipice and they have to impress the fans. So I believe that they've thought of ways around this. And this is also an unprecedented time of being true to the comics in a lot of different ways. And all I'm going to say is watch Deadpool and you see what I mean. Also, Loki season 2. There are certain elements there that are so comic book related that, you know, the kind of thing that we never thought would happen. Actually, one from Deadpool I can say, because obviously it's there, is Wolverine's yellow costume. But there are so many other things. So I do believe they're aware, and they wouldn't cast this if they didn't think it was going to be the right decision for them. And especially knowing how expensive Robert Downey Jr. is. That's a big risk on their part. So they have to have something there. It can't just be a bluff. They have to have something there if they're going to spend that amount of money on Robert Downey Jr. It means the story has to work. It means that it fits the narrative that they have, and they believe that it's going to honor parts of the comics without being exactly like the comics in the same ways they did with Civil War. So there are my thoughts.